What if I told you that the world's most famous painting became iconic not because of its beauty, but because it was stolen? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Picture this. You're walking through the Louvre Museum in Paris at the beginning of the 20th century. You pass by hundreds of masterpieces, Renaissance paintings hanging on every wall, each one competing for your attention. Among them, there's a small portrait of a woman with an enigmatic smile. It's pleasant enough, certainly well crafted, but nothing that would make you stop in your tracks. You'd probably walk right past it without giving it a second thought. Has this ever happened to you when visiting a museum, overlooking something that everyone else seems to think is extraordinary? That small portrait was the Mona Lisa, and believe it or not, she was just another painting, collecting dust in the galleries. No crowds gathered around her, no special security protected her, no international fame preceded her. She was simply one artwork among thousands, appreciated only by a select group of art critics, gallery owners, and fellow artists who understood Renaissance techniques. The general public? They barely knew she existed. It's almost impossible to imagine today, isn't it? The painting that now attracts 20,000 visitors daily was once so unremarkable that museum guards wouldn't even notice if she went missing. And that's exactly what happened. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you about how fame really works, even in the art world. Sometimes it's not talent or beauty that creates a legend. It's mystery, scandal, and the perfect crime. If you're still here, that tells me something important. You're someone who appreciates depth, who values stories told the right way, who doesn't just skim the surface, but actually wants to understand how history unfolded. This channel is built for people exactly like you. Every video is researched thoroughly, crafted carefully, and designed to take you on a journey through the most fascinating moments in history that often get overlooked or oversimplified elsewhere. Subscribing means you won't miss the next story, whether it's about art heists, unsolved mysteries, cultural transformations, or the hidden truths behind events that shaped our world. This isn't just content. It's a curated collection of narratives that deserve your attention. Hit that subscribe button right now, because the next video might be the one that changes how you see something you thought you already understood. And honestly, if this story kept you engaged for this long, imagine what else is waiting for you here. Don't just watch. Become part of this community of curious minds who refuse to accept surface-level explanations. Subscribe, and let's continue exploring together. On a sweltering summer morning in August 1911, while Paris was suffering through an intense heat wave, an Italian glazier named Vincenzo Peruggia was about to change art history forever. He was just a regular worker, a 29-year-old immigrant living in a small room in Paris's 10th arrondissement, working for a glass company that had been hired to protect the Louvre's most valuable paintings. Nothing about him suggested he would become one of the most notorious art thieves in history. He wasn't a mastermind criminal or a sophisticated con artist. He was simply a man with a plan and an opportunity. But here's where the story gets fascinating. Peruggia wasn't motivated by money, at least not initially. He was driven by something much more powerful: patriotism. As he installed protective glass over Italian masterpieces hanging in French museums, something inside him snapped. How could these treasures of Italian genius be displayed on the walls of France? How could his homeland's greatest artistic achievements belong to another nation? This burning resentment, this passionate belief that he was righting a historical wrong, would lead him to commit an act so audacious that it would inadvertently create the most famous painting in human history. What Peruggia didn't realize as he carefully planned his heist was that he wasn't just stealing a painting. He was about to give birth to a legend. The Mona Lisa's disappearance would trigger an investigation that would captivate the entire world, spawn countless theories, ensnare innocent suspects, and transform an overlooked Renaissance portrait into an international obsession. The empty space on the Louvre's wall would become more famous than the painting itself had ever been. So how did a simple worker manage to walk out of the most prestigious museum in the world with Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece tucked under his coat. What went wrong with the investigation that would last for years? And how did this theft, paradoxically, create the very fame that now protects the painting from ever being stolen again? The moment the Mona Lisa vanished, something extraordinary happened. It wasn't just a painting that disappeared. It was the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through history. The investigation that followed became a phenomenon unlike anything the world had seen before. For years, this case would dominate newspapers across continents, spark countless theories, and turn an obscure, Renaissance portrait into a household name. The hidden truth was that the theft itself was creating more fame than Leonardo's brushstrokes ever had. Every day the painting remained missing. Its legend grew stronger. The impact was undeniable. People who had never set foot in an art museum suddenly cared deeply about a painting they'd never heard of before. But let's go back to that pivotal summer morning when everything changed. August 1911 in Paris wasn't just hot, it was suffocating. The kind of heat that makes stone buildings feel like ovens and turns cobblestone streets into shimmering mirages. Parisians were already on edge, uncomfortable, restless. The city was holding its breath, waiting for relief that wouldn't come. And into this oppressive atmosphere walked Vincenzo Peruggia, a man about to make a decision that would alter the course of art history. At exactly 6 in the morning on August 21st, Peruggia stepped out of his modest room on Rue de l'Hôpital Saint-Louis. The journey from anonymity to infamy begins with a single step, and this was his. He was dressed in his work smock, the perfect disguise hiding in plain sight. To anyone watching, he was just another laborer heading to another day of honest work. But behind that unremarkable exterior was a mind racing with a carefully crafted plan, a heart pounding with patriotic fervor, and a determination that most people never access in their entire lives. As he walked through those empty dawn streets, the weight of what he was about to do must have pressed down on him with every footstep. This wasn't impulse. This was calculated audacity. He had spent days, maybe weeks, mapping out every detail, understanding the museum's routines, identifying the vulnerabilities in their security. The behind-the-scenes knowledge he'd gained as a legitimate worker at the Louvre was now his greatest weapon. Now I want to go even deeper into what happened when he actually arrived at the museum that morning, because the revelation of how simple it actually was will shock you. The Louvre, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, was about to be exposed as surprisingly vulnerable, and Peruggia knew exactly how to exploit that weakness. Write in the comments, calculated risk, if you're following this incredible journey with me. That 30-minute walk through Paris changed everything. Think about the mindset required to do what Peruggia was doing. Every step bringing him closer to a point of no return. Every breath filled with the tension of knowing that within hours, he'd either be a hero in his own mind or a prisoner. Rue de Rivoli stretched out before him, that elegant street running alongside the magnificent Louvre, and he was just another anonymous figure in a work smock making his way to a job. The transformation from worker to thief happens not in the act itself, but in the decision to cross that threshold. Here's where the hidden truth about security becomes crystal clear. It was Monday, which meant the museum was officially closed to the public. No tourists, no art enthusiasts, no crowds. But here's the crucial detail. The doors weren't locked. They remained wide open for workers from the Gobier Company, the glass-making business that had been contracted for a special project. Peruggia wasn't breaking in. He was walking in through the front door, invited, expected, trusted. Sometimes the biggest heists don't require elaborate schemes or high-tech gadgets. They require understanding the system well enough to use it against itself. And what was this project that gave him such perfect access? The Louvre had recently faced a series of troubling incidents. Paintings were being vandalized, damaged by visitors, or perhaps intentional saboteurs. The revelations of these attacks had shocked museum management into action. Their response was to protect their 1,600 most significant pieces with protective glass. It was a massive undertaking, a behind-the-scenes operation that would require weeks of work, dozens of craftsmen, and unlimited access to the galleries. The irony is almost poetic. The museum was installing security measures to protect their treasures, and in doing so, they were giving a thief the perfect opportunity to study every painting, understand every layout, and plan the perfect crime. Perugia had legitimate reasons to be anywhere in the museum, handling paintings, moving them, examining them closely. His presence wasn't suspicious. It was required. The impact of this decision by museum management would prove catastrophic, though they had no way of knowing it at the time. Now imagine being Perugia, walking into that vast empty museum knowing that today is the day, that the journey from planning to execution is finally beginning, and that everything depends on staying calm, staying in character, and seizing the moment when it presents itself. Write in the comments, the perfect disguise, if you're seeing how brilliantly simple this plan actually was. For days leading up to this moment, Perugia had been doing exactly what he was hired to do, installing protective glass on paintings in the Salon Carré, a relatively small room on the museum's first floor. But with every pane of glass he carefully positioned, with every masterpiece he handled, he was doing something else entirely. He was studying, observing, planning. This is what separates ordinary people from those who change history. The ability to see opportunity where others see only routine. His legitimate work assignment was the perfect cover, giving him unrestricted access to his target while appearing completely innocent. When he arrived at the Louvre that morning, everything had to look normal. The transformation from honest worker to art thief couldn't show on his face or in his behavior. He exchanged casual words with his colleagues, probably talked about the weather, maybe complained about the heat like everyone else. His tone had to be light, his demeanor relaxed. One suspicious glance, one nervous gesture, and the entire plan would crumble. Then, as naturally as he'd done dozens of times before, he entered the museum and made his way across the grand gallery toward the Salon Carré. Each step was calculated, measured, deliberate, and then came the revelation that would define everything. When Perugia arrived at the Salon Carré, there was nobody inside. Not a single guard, not a curator, not another worker. He found himself completely alone with several priceless paintings and the audacious plan that had been burning in his mind for weeks. This was the moment every criminal dreams of and most never experience, when opportunity and preparation collide perfectly. Think about the impact of that silence. In that empty room, surrounded by centuries of artistic genius, Perugia was faced with a decision that couldn't be reversed. The mindset required to act in that moment is extraordinary. Most people would freeze, paralyzed by fear or doubt. But he had come too far, believed too deeply in his mission. The behind-the-scenes knowledge he'd accumulated told him this window of opportunity wouldn't last long. Someone would come. Someone always comes. But right now, in this suspended moment of possibility, he was alone with history itself. The journey from thought to action is sometimes measured in heartbeats, and Perugia's heart must have been pounding as he stood there, knowing that what happened next would echo through time in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Write in the comments, the moment of truth, if you can feel the tension of this incredible scene. What drove Perugia wasn't greed, at least not initially. It was something far more powerful and consuming. In the days leading up to the theft, he had been placing protective glass over several Italian masters' paintings, and each one felt like a personal wound. Imagine the internal conflict, the emotional pain of a passionate patriot forced to preserve treasures that he believed belonged to his homeland. Every time he touched a Raphael, every time he secured glass over a Titian, he was confronting what he saw as a fundamental injustice. These weren't just paintings to him. They were stolen pieces of Italian soul, Italian genius, Italian glory, all displayed on foreign walls as trophies of conquest. The transformation from resentment to action doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process, a mindset shift that occurs when someone decides they can no longer tolerate what they perceive as wrong. Perugia reached that breaking point. Unable to bear the thought of Italian art treasures remaining in France, he made a decision that would alter his life forever. He would take one of these paintings and bring it back to what he considered its rightful home in Italy. This wasn't theft in his mind. It was repatriation, justice, a correction of historical wrongs. But which painting would he choose? Among all the Italian masterpieces surrounding him, one caught his particular attention for very practical reasons. It was relatively small, measuring just 77 centimeters in height and 53 centimeters in width. The hidden truth about successful crimes is that they often come down to logistics, not just courage. This painting was advantageous precisely because of its modest size, easy to handle, easier to conceal, perfect for his purposes. It was a portrait by Leonardo da Vinci himself, showing a Florentine woman with an enigmatic smile, the Mona Lisa. She wasn't the most famous painting in the room, not even close, but she was Italian, she was Leonardo's, and most importantly, she was manageable. The impact of this choice would be far greater than Perugia could have imagined. He was selecting not just a painting, but a future icon, though he had no way of knowing that the journey he was about to embark on would transform this quiet portrait into the most recognizable image in human history. Now, what happened next required nerves of steel and a clarity of purpose that most people never access in their entire lives. Write in the comments, "Driven by belief," if you understand how powerful conviction can be, even when misguided. Standing before Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of Mona Lisa, also known as La Joconde, Perugia had spent days admiring that enigmatic smile while installing her protective covering. He'd studied every brushstroke, every subtle gradation of color that made her seem almost alive. And now, in this moment of absolute solitude, she would be his, not as a possession born of greed, but as a treasure he believed he was rescuing, returning to her rightful home. The transformation from observer to actor happened in an instant. Without hesitation, Perugia reached up and took down the portrait from the wall. There's a hidden truth about decisive moments. They don't allow for second-guessing. Doubt is the enemy of action, and Perugia had no room for doubt. Without losing a single second, he moved with surprising speed, slipping into a museum staircase where he'd be hidden from view, where he could work undisturbed. Every movement was purposeful, every second counted. Here's where the behind-the-scenes knowledge of his trade became invaluable. Out of sight in that narrow staircase, Perugia carefully removed the protective glass, the very same glass he himself had installed just days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him. Then came the ornate frame, heavy and elaborate, designed to showcase the masterpiece it contained. But Perugia made a critical decision in that moment. He would keep only the wooden panel on which Leonardo da Vinci had painted the famous portrait. The frame and glass were unnecessary weight, unnecessary risk. Strip away everything non-essential. That's the mindset of someone thinking clearly under pressure. Think about the precision required here. He's in a staircase, exposed if anyone happens to pass by, handling a centuries-old artwork that could be damaged by the slightest mistake. His hands couldn't shake. His focus couldn't waver. The impact of any error would be catastrophic, not just for the painting, but for his entire plan. This wasn't just theft. It was a delicate operation requiring the steady hands of a craftsman and the nerves of a gambler betting everything on a single hand. Now, with the wooden panel free from its constraints, Perugia faced the next challenge, getting out of the museum with the most recognizable face in Renaissance art hidden beneath his clothing. Write in the comments, "Steady hands, bold heart," if you're amazed by the audacity of what he pulled off. With remarkable calm that can only come from absolute conviction, Perugia slipped the wooden panel under his work smock. Feel the weight of that moment. Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece, painted over 400 years earlier, now pressed against the chest of a 29-year-old Italian glazier. The transformation from museum treasure to hidden contraband happened in seconds. Then came the truly breathtaking part. He simply walked out. Calmly, deliberately, he left the museum, passing guards who nodded at him, colleagues who might have said goodbye, curators who were too busy with their own tasks to notice anything unusual. He was holding the Florentine master's masterpiece tightly pressed against his chest, and nobody suspected a thing. The journey back to his small room on Rue de l'Hôpital Saint-Louis must have felt both endless and instantaneous. Every pedestrian was a potential threat. every policeman a nightmare scenario. But Perugia maintained his composure, his pace, his unremarkable appearance. When he finally reached his modest quarters, he stashed the stolen painting in a hidden compartment of a suitcase, a false bottom he'd prepared specifically for this purpose, and just like that, the most famous art theft in history was complete. The hidden truth was staggering. Nobody knew it had happened. Think about the impact of that silence. Somewhere in Paris, in a tiny worker's apartment, lay a treasure worth more than most people would earn in multiple lifetimes, and the world continued spinning as if nothing had changed. The mindset required to then just sit there, waiting, knowing what you possess, and what the consequences would be if discovered. It's almost incomprehensible. Meanwhile, back at the Louvre, the morning continued its normal rhythm. A little while later, a guard was doing his usual rounds through the museum's galleries. He walked past painting after painting, his eyes scanning the walls with the practiced indifference of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Then something caught his attention, an empty spot on the wall where the Mona Lisa had hung. But here's where the revelation of how little the painting was valued becomes clear, because what happened next shows just how unremarkable she truly was at that time. Write in the comments, hidden in plain sight, if you're fascinated by how simple audacity can triumph over complex security. The guard didn't panic. He didn't rush to sound an alarm. He didn't even think it was particularly important. He simply assumed that the museum curators had probably moved the painting somewhere else for restoration work, or perhaps for a photograph. It didn't seem necessary to inform management immediately. Let that sink in for a moment. A Renaissance masterpiece had vanished from the walls of the Louvre, and the person who noticed its absence thought so little of it that he didn't bother reporting it. This casual reaction reveals the hidden truth about the Mona Lisa's status in 1911. She didn't have the level of worldwide fame that she enjoys today. She wasn't mobbed by tourists. She didn't have her own security detail. She was just another Renaissance painting among thousands in the collection, appreciated by experts but largely ignored by the general public. The transformation from obscurity to icon hadn't happened yet. The impact of her disappearance would create that transformation, but at this moment, she was still just a pleasant portrait on a museum wall. So who was this woman with the enigmatic smile? The 16th century painting represents a woman from Florence named Lisa Gherardini, though people also refer to her as Mona Gherardini. Mona with 2 N's, which is short for Madonna, essentially meaning lady or madam in Italian. She was the wife of a wealthy Florentine merchant, living an ordinary life for someone of her social class. She had no idea that Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of her would one day become the most recognized face in art history. The journey from respectable merchant's wife to eternal icon took centuries, and even then, it required a catalyst that nobody could have predicted. Behind the scenes of this seemingly simple portrait lies Leonardo's genius, his innovative techniques, his understanding of light and shadow, his ability to capture something ineffable in human expression. But genius alone doesn't create fame. The mindset of the era was different. Art was appreciated intellectually, studied academically, but it hadn't yet become the pop culture phenomenon it would eventually become. Now here's where the story takes an even more fascinating turn, because the painting's absence was about to be discovered by someone who actually cared about its whereabouts. Write in the comments, overlooked genius if you find it. Incredible how undervalued she was before the theft. The painting also goes by another name, La Gioconda, which is a diminutive of her husband's family name, Francesco del Giocondo. It's fascinating how identity works, isn't it? This woman's portrait would be known not by her own name, but by a playful variation of her husband's surname. Yet this Italian name would become one of the most recognizable in art history, spoken in every language, in every corner of the world. The journey from merchant's wife to global icon is one of the most remarkable transformations in cultural history. Leonardo da Vinci completed this portrait in Italy, most likely between 1503 and 1506, during the height of the Renaissance, when Florence was the epicenter of artistic revolution. He worked on it for years, never quite satisfied, always refining, always seeking that perfect balance of technique and emotion. The hidden truth is that Leonardo probably didn't think of this as his greatest work. He created the Last Supper, engineered flying machines, studied human anatomy in ways no one had before. But this small portrait of a merchant's wife would outlast all his other achievements in popular consciousness. The painting arrived in France in 1516 when Leonardo da Vinci himself visited Clos-Lucé at the invitation of King Francis III. Imagine that journey, the aging master traveling across the Alps, bringing with him this portrait he'd kept close for over a decade. King Francis I, recognizing genius when he saw it, decided to purchase the painting. Once it became part of the royal collection, it began its own journey through French history, transported between various royal residences: Fontainebleau, the Louvre, the Tuileries, and the Palace of Versailles. Each move reflected the changing tastes and priorities of French monarchs. This is precisely why Perugia felt justified in his theft. In his mindset, the painting was Italian, created by an Italian genius, depicting an Italian woman, completed on Italian soil. The fact that it had been in France for nearly 400 years didn't matter to him. The impact of nationalist sentiment can be incredibly powerful, capable of driving someone to risk everything for what they believe is a righteous cause. Now, back at the Louvre on that fateful Tuesday morning, someone was about to notice the empty wall and actually care enough to investigate, setting in motion a chain of events that would captivate the entire world. Write in the comments, 4 centuries later, if you're struck by how long the painting had already been in France before the theft. The Mona Lisa was shown to the public for the very first time in 1798 at the Louvre, which had recently been transformed into a national museum during the Revolutionary period. Think about the significance of that moment. Art that had been locked away in royal palaces, enjoyed only by monarchs and their inner circles, was suddenly accessible to ordinary people. It was a transformation in how society valued culture, a democratization of beauty and knowledge. But even with this revolutionary access, the Mona Lisa didn't capture the public's imagination. Until the early 20th century, she was something that only really caught the eye of specialized audiences: art enthusiasts who appreciated Renaissance technique, gallery owners looking for valuable pieces, art critics analyzing Leonardo's mastery, and fellow artists studying his methods. The general public walked right past her. The hidden truth is that fame isn't always about quality or genius. Sometimes it's about timing, context, and the stories we tell about things. The Mona Lisa had the genius, but she was still waiting for her story. That story was about to begin on Tuesday, August 22, 1911, the day after the theft, though nobody knew it yet. Louis Béroux, a painter who regularly copied artworks at the Louvre, arrived that morning with a specific mission. He was there to sketch the Mona Lisa for his upcoming art piece. This was common practice. Artists would come to the museum, set up their easels, and spend hours copying the masters, learning their techniques, studying their composition. It was part of artistic education, a behind-the-scenes journey that every serious painter undertook. Béroux had probably sketched dozens of paintings in the Louvre over the years. He knew the museum's rhythms, understood its routines, had his favorite spots. The impact of what he was about to discover would change not just his day, but the entire trajectory of art history. He made his way to the Salon Carré, expecting to see that familiar enigmatic smile waiting for him on the wall. Instead, he found something that would trigger a transformation from quiet obscurity to worldwide obsession. An empty space where Leonardo's masterpiece should have been, and the beginning of the greatest art mystery the world had ever known. Write in the comments, "The wrong day," if you can imagine Béroux's confusion at that moment. When Béroux made his way to the Salon Carré, ready to begin his work, he stopped in his tracks. Disappointment washed over him. In front of him, the wall was completely empty. No Mona Lisa. No enigmatic smile. Just bare wall and the faint outline where the painting had hung. He asked around, approaching the guards with the casual curiosity of someone facing a minor inconvenience. The guards, equally casual, mentioned that the painting was probably in the photography studio. Nothing to worry about. These things happened all the time. paintings moved for restoration, for documentation, for various administrative reasons. Beirut asked how long it would take, explaining that he too wanted to capture the portrait, that he'd come specifically for this purpose. The guards said they'd look into it. He waited. Time passed. The mindset of someone waiting for something that should be simple starts to shift. After a while, doesn't it? Patience turns to irritation, irritation to concern. As hours passed and Beirut returned to ask again, he noticed something different in the guards' demeanor. They were embarrassed now, uncomfortable. The painting wasn't in the photography studio. They'd checked. So where was it? This is where the transformation from routine to crisis happens. Someone has to be willing to face an uncomfortable truth, to say out loud what everyone is starting to suspect. It became necessary to face the facts. The Mona Lisa was missing, not temporarily relocated, not being photographed. Missing. The impact of that realization rippled through the museum like a shockwave. At 11 a.m., the police headquarters was notified, and the response was immediate and massive. About 60 officers arrived, sent by Prefect Louis Lepine to investigate this unprecedented theft. Think about that decision to call the police. It meant admitting failure, acknowledging that the museum's security had been breached, accepting that one of the nation's treasures had vanished under their watch. The hidden truth was that the Louvre's security had always been more reputation than reality, and now that illusion was shattered. Behind the scenes, panic was setting in. This wasn't just a missing painting. It was a national embarrassment, a cultural catastrophe in the making. The journey from discovery to investigation was swift, but what investigators were about to find would both clarify and complicate everything, revealing just how audaciously simple Perugia's plan had been. Write in the comments the moment everything changed. If you can feel how this discovery shifted everything into high gear. The officers didn't waste time. They immediately ordered the entire museum to be closed for a full week, transforming the Louvre from a cultural treasure house into a crime scene. Every room, every corridor, every storage area in that vast complex would be searched. The impact of this decision was enormous. This was one of the world's most important museums, suddenly shuttered, suddenly the center of a criminal investigation. Behind the scenes, curators were panicking, administrators were scrambling, and somewhere in the 10th arrondissement, Vincenzo Perugia was probably holding his breath, waiting to see if his audacity would be discovered. The search didn't take long to yield results. Investigators quickly found the painting's frame and protective glass abandoned in a small staircase leading to the Visconti courtyard. This was the first real clue about how the theft had been executed. The hidden truth was right there in front of them. Whoever took the painting knew the museum intimately, understood its layout, knew where they could work without being seen. The frame and glass were heavy, ornate, valuable in their own right, but the thief had discarded them like trash. This told investigators something crucial about the mindset of the criminal. They wanted only the painting itself. Nothing else mattered. Then came what seemed like the breakthrough everyone was hoping for. Criminologist Alphonse Bertillon, a remarkable pioneer in forensic identification and a man whose innovative techniques were revolutionizing police work, discovered a thumbprint on the protective glass. This was cutting-edge science at the time, a transformation in how criminals could be caught. Prefect Louis Lepine was thrilled, absolutely convinced that the case would be solved. Within 24 hours. After all, they had physical evidence. They had a clue that couldn't lie, couldn't hide, couldn't escape. The journey from crime to capture seemed suddenly short and clear. Imagine the confidence in that moment. The authorities believed they were on the verge of a swift resolution, that modern forensic science would triumph over criminal cunning. They had the tools, they had the expertise, they had the determination. What they didn't know was that their technology, as revolutionary as it was, still had limitations that would prove critical. Now, the real test was about to begin, matching that thumbprint to a suspect, and this is where the investigation would hit its first major obstacle, revealing just how lucky Perugia had been and how fragile the line between capture and escape truly was. Write in the comments, science versus luck, if you're curious about how this forensic breakthrough played out. Police took fingerprints from 257 people who worked at the Louvre. Every guard, every curator, every maintenance worker, every contractor who had access to the building. It was a massive undertaking, methodical and thorough. The hidden truth, however, was that forensic science in 1911 was still in its infancy, still learning, still imperfect. The technique was revolutionary but crude. The fingerprint lifted from the protective glass was insufficiently precise to make a definitive match. Can you imagine the frustration? They had the evidence right there, physical proof left by the thief's own hand, and yet the technology wasn't quite advanced enough to turn that evidence into identification. Vincenzo Peruggia had a stroke of incredible luck and was able to slip through the cracks of the investigation. His fingerprints were taken along with everyone else's, examined, compared, and ultimately dismissed. The transformation from prime suspect to cleared individual happened not because he was innocent, but because the tools available weren't sophisticated enough to prove his guilt. Prefect Louis Lepin was completely furious, his confidence in a swift resolution shattered by the limitations of the very science he'd trusted. The director of the Louvre, overwhelmed by the embarrassment and scandal, decided to resign in disgrace. Behind the scenes, heads were rolling, careers were ending, and the investigation was no closer to solving the mystery. But here's where something unexpected happened. The press seized upon the story with voracious appetite, and suddenly the theft was everywhere. Front-page news across Europe and beyond. The public became utterly fascinated with this mysterious theft. Who had taken her? Why? Where was she now? The impact of media attention transformed the Mona Lisa from an overlooked museum piece into a cultural phenomenon. Reward offers began appearing, each one larger than the last. The Society of Friends of the Louvre promised 25,000 francs to whoever found the painting. L'Illustration magazine, recognizing the story's power to sell copies, offered 50,000 francs. Think about what was happening here. The journey from obscurity to fame wasn't about the painting's artistic merit. It was about mystery, scandal, and the human fascination with the unknown. Every newspaper article, every reward offer, every theory and speculation was building the Mona Lisa's legend. The mindset of the public shifted dramatically. People who'd never cared about Renaissance art suddenly wanted to know everything about this stolen masterpiece. The empty space on the Louvre's wall became more famous than the painting had ever been. Now, as the investigation continued to spiral into dead ends and false leads, something even stranger was about to happen that would show just how desperate and misdirected the authorities had become. Write in the comments, "Fame through mystery," if you see how the theft itself created the legend. The Mona Lisa's fame grew steadily and spread internationally in a way that would have been impossible before the theft. People who had never heard of her suddenly knew her name, suddenly cared about her fate. The painting's empty spot on the wall began to attract curious visitors from around the world. They came not to see the painting. They came to see where it had been. The transformation was complete and utterly paradoxical. The absence of the painting was more powerful than its presence had ever been. Some visitors even began leaving flowers at the empty space, as if at a memorial for something beloved that had died. This wasn't just art appreciation. This was emotional connection, public mourning, collective fascination with loss and mystery. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the investigation was completely stalled, leading to numerous dead ends that wasted precious time and resources. This is where the hidden truth about high-profile cases becomes clear. They attract attention not just from genuine witnesses, but from attention seekers, fantasists, and people with their own agendas. Mythomaniacs came forward claiming responsibility for the theft, each one spinning elaborate stories about how and why they'd stolen the Mona Lisa. Among them was Gabriele D'Annunzio, the famous Italian writer, who seemed to relish the notoriety even though he had nothing to do with the actual crime. But the most tragic misdirection involved the poet Guillaume Apollinaire. The impact of this false lead was devastating and reveals how desperate the authorities had become. The museum, in taking inventory after the theft, discovered to its astonishment that close to 300 pieces were unaccounted for. Among these missing items were ancient statuettes that had been sold to Apollinaire years earlier by a con artist named Gabriel Pierre. The journey from minor art theft to major suspect happened quickly. Although Apollinaire no longer even possessed the statuettes, he'd sold them to another artist, a certain Pablo Picasso. He ended up imprisoned on September 7, 1911. Think about the mindset of investigators at this point. They were grasping at straws, following any lead no matter how tangential, hoping something would break the case open. Apollinaire was questioned. Picasso was questioned. And after a quick investigation that revealed nothing connected them to the Mona Lisa, both were released. But precious weeks had been wasted, and the real thief remained. Completely undetected, living just 3 kilometers from the Louvre, with the painting hidden under his bed. Now, as the investigation continued to flounder and the public's fascination only intensified, Perugia was settling into what must have been both the most terrifying and the most satisfying period of his life, knowing he'd gotten away with the impossible. Write in the comments, "Hidden in plain sight," if you're amazed that he was living so close to the crime scene the entire time. And that's where we'll pause for now, with Perugia living quietly in Paris, the painting hidden under his bed, and the entire world searching for something that was never far away. The journey from theft to discovery still has remarkable twists ahead, revelations that will shock everyone involved, and a conclusion that nobody could have predicted. If you've made it this far with me, I genuinely appreciate you taking this journey through one of history's most fascinating art mysteries. There's real value in understanding how fame is created, how a single audacious decision can transform culture itself, and how sometimes the simplest plans are the most effective. If you found this story as captivating as I do, consider subscribing to the channel. There are so many more hidden histories and incredible true stories waiting to be explored together. Leave a comment saying, "Until the very end," so I know you stuck with me through this entire wild ride. It helps me understand what resonates with you, and honestly, I love seeing who's watching from where, and what moments stood out to you. And if this story grabbed you, hit that like button. It's a small gesture that makes a real difference in helping others discover these kinds of deep dives into history's most intriguing moments. Now, there's a video right here that continues exploring how art, crime, and cultural obsession intersect in ways you wouldn't expect. Click and continue with me over there. I promise it's worth your time. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one.